Hello again, stranger. Johnny here from Mortar and Ivy, and today I would like to talk to you about a film. Now, very rarely do I ever watch a film that I can consider immediately one of the best films I've ever seen, one of my favorite films beyond doubt. Also, rarely can I ever admit a documentary is one of the favorites I've ever seen, one of the best I've ever seen, without a doubt. And rarely, very rarely, ultra rarely, can I admit both immediately upon viewing said film. Thus was the case with Peter Jackson's latest stunner, They Shall Never Grow Old, something along those lines. For those who haven't heard of this film or who haven't seen it, it is very much a World War I documentary. I know, right? You would think snoozer. Not the case at all. It was amazing. It was beyond amazing. It was vivid. It was... oh my gosh, there's so much I have to say about it. It's so little time to cover it. But let me just go over some basics about it. Peter Jackson had been involved in this project for a multitude of years. And it just so happened that they tried to release it at the time of the centenary. Am I recording? Yes. They tried to release it at the time of the centenary of the World War I, the end of the World War I. The First World War, well, originally known as the Great War, but post-production lagged a little bit, and they were only able to release it, I think, later in November or early December, I think it was. So they were like a couple months late, but big deal, right? And he had been involved in this project for a number of years. He started it long before he started production on Mortal Engines, which, by the way, it's funny that they released around the same time, and Mortal Engines, this sci-fi stunner with like a huge budget, turned out to be kind of a stinker, whereas this documentary about World War I with a tenth of the budget was way better. Now, I say a tenth of the budget, but it is by no means low budget. A lot of time and money went into making this, and a lot of it has to do with this attention to detail. Seriously, the dead practically come alive in this in this documentary. It's unlike other documentaries. There are no historians rambling on about the strategies of the generals or anything like that. They don't show you graphs and maps and charts of who went where and dotted line and here was the trench, blah blah blah. Not the case at all. It was made solely using footage from the era, 100-year-old footage from World War I, as well as some still photography and illustrative property from the era. Like, nothing in it, no footage used is less than 100 years old. It was all modern, or it was contemporary stuff to the era. Like I said, it is the best film I've seen all year. It is easily the best World War I documentary I've seen. I've only seen two others, one being 2005's Gallipoli, which was a Turkish production, but there's English language version, produced by Jeremy Irons and narrated by Sam Neill, I think it was. But that, I thought, set the bar. That was amazing. 2005's Gallipoli was, without a doubt, the best I'd ever seen. This one, however, blew it out of the water. Like I said, attention to detail. There was they took a minute, fine-tooth comb over this footage to make something really splendid. And I think it's the best work by Peter Jackson, too. I think it's better than his Lord of the Rings works. And that clearly set the bar for all his other works. Even Bad Taste and Brain Dead and Frighteners and stuff, which are all classics in my book. But I'll make another video, by the way, and I'll put a link up here when it's done of rating Peter Jackson's films from best to worst, all of his films. But yeah, the scopes of it, it's not like other documentaries on World War I. They take it from the beginning to the end, featuring all the countries and all the battles and whatnot. There's a very narrow scope because they wanted to, and by they I mean Peter Jackson and company, wanted to fit in a lot of material, so they had to kind of focus in on one part of the war, and that is from the British perspective on the front lines of the trenches on the ground. So none of the naval stuff, none of the air stuff, nothing from Australians or Germans or New Zealanders or anything like that. Just the Brits, just on the ground. And they kind of start from when the soldiers get enlisted, from enlistment to training to deployment and finally to battle itself and then coming home. Like the average lifespan of a term in World War I. Like I said, I've been kind of saving this best part for last, and that is the process to which Peter Jackson and company use to make this documentary. Okay, you're wondering why I think it's so great, and what it is they took old 100-year-old footage and made it as if it was filmed today. That footage back then, they didn't have sound, they added sound. It didn't have color, they added color. It was really poor shape, and they restored it to the point where it is vivid, and it's mind-blowing. It looks like it was filmed today, most of it, as well as they could anyways. It's not perfect, but you can only do so much with 100-year-old film that's, in varying levels of preservation. And like I said, this process is amazing, okay? How they made it come to life. First of all, they took black and white footage. That's all they had. That's all that existed at the time, was black and white footage. And a lot of it was unused. They hadn't used it in any previous documentaries or footage materials because it was too dark, too light, or too damaged to use. So they went about restoring it. They went about restoring it. What was too light, they darkened. What was too dark, they lightened. What was too broken and scratched and unrepairable, they repaired digitally using modern technology. They removed the scratches, the blemishes, the broken frames. They created missing frames using software. The frame rate they had to change because back in the day, multiple frame rates were used, anything from like 8 to 16 frames per second, and they fixed it all so that it was all 24 frames per second. And a lot of it was hand cranked, so there lacked consistency in that movement. You ever watch old footage and everybody's kind of moving around really fast and it looks kind of funny, like you would picture Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton doing? Very erratic, and they had to fix that so it looked like modern day, how people move in real time, more realistic. So they digitally created transition frames as well to move it from varying levels of frame rates to modern day frame rate. They had to digitally create frames that transitioned those frames. So that was really neat. That was really special what they did to digitally create something that looked more modern than what was presented. After they did all that, that was most of the work right there, taking black and white footage and taking horrible black and white footage and making great black and white footage. Then they colorized it, and like I said, attention to detail. They literally went to France to get the right color of the grass of the region. They had all the uniforms presented, both German and British, and they used real life relics from that era to get the color of the uniforms right. And of course, skin tone, the sky, attention to weather, etc. The lighting, they didn't just plaster color over it. They found out what was most likely the correct color for that day that the footage was taken and applied it to the process. It's amazing. They had a depth. There's 3D releases. I didn't watch the 3D release of this film, but I know it exists, and so they had to, for that version of the film, they had to add that depth and render it in 3 dimensions. And they added sound. That's the most exciting part, is they added sound, and they didn't just blurp, like whip something up at the last minute. They spent years doing. They took forensic lip readers used by police when every time they have security cam footage and they need to lip read what someone's saying. They have these people that are experts in forensic lip reading, and they would watch this footage. They would determine the best known dialogue that the soldiers in the video were saying, and they'd write it down. And then they hired actors, not just any actors from the region that those soldiers were from. The footage a lot of times showed, judging by the uniform and by records kept, they knew what companies and regiments these soldiers were in, and so they found out where those regiments were from, determined where the soldiers were from, found actors from those same regions to then apply those accents to the dialogue figured out by the forensic readers. So the dialogue spoken in the film is as accurate as you can do 100 years after they've passed. And of course, there's the Foley, the sound effects that they added. They didn't just, crack carrots and mash metal doors and stuff. They used actual equipment and weaponry from the era to recreate the sounds. Peter Jackson actually owns tons of World War I equipment just like in his backyard. If you had that much stupid money, you would too, as you do, he said, as you do. And so they actually recreated the sound of them opening these canisters and loading these cannons using the actual machinery from that era. But they couldn't fire them because these are, 100-year-old relics. So they had to find modern day equivalents for the firing and explosions. And last but not least, is the most important part of this process, they didn't use any historians, they didn't use Peter Jackson or anybody talking about the war. They used real life footage, or at least the sound from the footage recorded throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s of the veterans relaying their stories from the war. So all the audio in the entire film was coming from straight from the veterans' mouths. It wasn't coming from anybody, any third parties. This was the real deal. Some problems they came across during the making of it, I wouldn't say necessarily problems, but opportunities, you could say. A lot of the footage was mostly just the soldiers goofing off. There was a lot of standing around, looking at the camera. A lot of these soldiers had never seen a camera before, a motion picture camera anyways. And a lot of them, they'd taken still photos and daguerreotypes, tintypes. I don't know, I'm not a photography expert, maybe after that point. But they had never seen a motion picture moving camera before, and so they didn't know what to do. They would just stand around and smile for this motion camera. They were trying to take footage, and they were just standing around smiling, etc. So a lot of the footage, they had to get the soldiers doing stuff. And you don't have a lot of footage of them how they would be in real life, like you do with Vietnam or World War II, where you see the soldiers doing what they do and ignoring the cameras. They were really, you could tell the camera was there. There's a lack of battle footage too, obviously. There wasn't much footage taken during actual open battle during World War I, and that is because a lot of times photographers didn't want to risk their lives. A lot of times they did risk their lives and then lost their lives because they didn't have a gun, they had a camera, and their footage was destroyed and they were destroyed, and it's very sad, it's very unfortunate. But Peter Jackson and company kind of made up with it using propaganda posters and materials such as magazines from the era to illustrate these, the actual open warfare. Otherwise, most of the footage was just soldiers goofing off and trying to, playing instruments and playing with dogs and stuff, and playing with sheep. A lot of animals. There's a lot of animals in this, and a child. What was a child doing there? And a couple of other things of note. This documentary was absolutely wonderful, but the subject matter isn't exactly casual. It's not fun. It's not a popcorn film by any means. Yeah, I had snacks in the film, but my goodness, it's so serious. The subject matter is so serious and sobering, and really puts a lot of things into perspective, especially life and death and war and the values upon each of which. There's a lot of footage of corpses, bodies, were people, individuals one time, no longer alive, and not to mention in varying states of decay. In the documentary, they show it all. They don't censor anything. Everything is seen. So it's not to be seen on a weak stomach. It's not to be seen by a younger viewer. It is better viewed with a mature sense of perspective, is what I'm trying to say. But all in all, it was amazing. Full 5 stars to Peter Jackson in what is his greatest work, I think. It will definitely stand the test of time for years, centuries maybe to come. Just a really amazing work, just a big, amazing project that they took this old footage in horrible condition and brought it to life. And that's the point, isn't it? This isn't something that just happened in the past. This isn't just history. This was the real life experience of many young men, some as young as 14, 15 years old in the war. They lied about their age, but the British government turned a blind eye to it. And many of them had never shot a gun before, let alone shot a person. Many of them hadn't seen death like that before. Many of them hadn't seen death at all. And here they were, given this impossible task of going to a foreign land and killing a person they didn't actually feel like killing. There was no disrespect among the Germans and the Brits when they took each other captive and imprisoned. They didn't necessarily treat each other horribly. They treated each other with respect, and the only thing they had that in common, that they were given this task of something that was impossible and futile and that they didn't want to do, but did anyway because that's what the country was asking of them. It's mind-blowing in every direction. Not just the film itself and how they made it in the process of it, but just the subject matter that it covers, the futility of war. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy They Shall Never Grow Old by Peter Jackson. I don't think it's in theaters anymore, but it should be released on DVD or in Blu-ray, and I highly suggest picking up in whatever format you can as soon as it comes out, especially if you I don't want to say enjoy, but respect history. This is definitely something that can be respected and, with perspective, enjoyed. I've been Johnny. You're always welcome in my neck of the woods.